Going to school in the 1950s or 60s was an experience like no other. Remember when school days meant chalk-covered blackboards, scraped knees after recess, milk in glass bottles, strict teachers, and the real fear of getting sent to the principal's office? Well, if you grew up in that time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. School wasn't just about learning, it was a core memory for most of us. So let's start right away with school buses and walking to school. Remember those sunshine yellow buses with squeaky vinyl seats? For many of us, mornings meant catching that rumbling chariot or walking neighborhood routes without adult supervision. We'd kick through autumn leaves, race friends home, and explore shortcuts through vacant lots. No helicopter parents, no cell phones, just the sweet freedom of making our own way through familiar streets, collecting stories with every step. The smell of freshly waxed school floors. That distinctive scent greeting us on the first day back after summer break. Remember how our shoes would squeak against those gleaming hallways? The way sunlight through tall windows created perfect golden pathways on that polished surface. How the janitor, Mr. Wilson, took such pride in those floors, warning us not to run and scuff his summer's work. That waxy perfume meant new beginnings, fresh notebooks, and unwritten possibilities. A smell that even now can transport us instantly back to September mornings and new pencil cases. After we arrived at school, it was time for the morning pledge of allegiance. Hand over heart, eyes on the classroom flag. Our days began with these shared words, I pledge allegiance. The classroom ritual connected us all before the first lesson. Sunlight would stream through tall windows as we stood beside wooden desks, voices joining in perfect unison. That brief moment of patriotism became as natural as breathing, creating a foundation of belonging before math and reading began. Another important thing from back then was the dress code and uniform expectations. Do you remember the thrill of picking the perfect school outfit? Maybe you or your sister begged Mom for those saddle shoes paired with plaid skirts and matching sweaters. Boys had pressed chinos, crew cuts, and neatly tucked shirts. Fashion was about fitting in while standing out just a little. Girls rolled their bobby socks just right, and boys folded their sleeves like James Dean. But schools had rules, strict ones. Hemlines had to pass the knee test, shirts stayed tucked, and blue jeans? Forget it. Teachers checked skirt lengths with rulers, and a dress code slip-up meant a trip to the principal's office. Looking sharp wasn't just about style, it taught discipline and respect. A lesson, if you ask me, that's been lost today. But enough about fashion. Let's step inside the classroom. Chalkboards and cursive writing. Remember that distinct screech of chalk across the blackboard? Our days were punctuated by the tap-tap-tap of the teacher writing, and the dusty smell that filled the room when someone clapped erasers after school. Being chosen for chalkboard erasers was both honor and punishment. Remember carrying those felt erasers outside, clapping them together in explosive clouds of white dust? The chalk would coat your hands, your clothes, your face, turning you into a ghost for those few minutes of duty. Thinking about this makes me feel as if it were yesterday. We'd practice our Palmer method penmanship for hours, gripping those wooden pencils until our fingers cramped. The swooping curves of capital Q and perfect loops of lowercase g weren't just letters. They were badges of growing up. Strict teachers and classroom discipline. I remember one of my teachers could silence a room with just one look. Back then, teachers commanded respect with wooden pointers and well-worn paddles hanging ominously on classroom walls. Remember, standing in the corner, facing the wall when you whispered during lessons? or writing "I will not talk in class" 50 times while everyone else had recess. There were no parent conferences for misbehavior, just swift consequences that made you think twice before passing notes again. The importance of memorization. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Our young minds absorbed multiplication tables, presidential names, state capitals, and poetry verses, all committed to memory through endless recitation. Remember standing beside your desk, reciting the Gettysburg Address without a single peek at your notes? That mixture of terror and pride when you nailed every line of Longfellow's Paul Revere's Ride in front of the class? Learning with film projectors and slideshows. The room would darken, and that magical whirring sound would begin. Do you recall fighting to sit where you could see the screen perfectly? The collective excitement when the AV monitor, the coolest job assignment, wheeled in that metal cart, the rhythmic click, click, click of film strips advancing, sometimes slightly out of sync with the accompanying record, and that distinctive burning smell when the bulb overheated during a particularly long science film about photosynthesis. I can almost smell it just thinking about it. Enough of studying. Now it is time for some fun. Classic school games in recess. Remember playing 7-Up with your head down on your cool desk, heart racing when someone tapped your thumb? Simple pleasures before digital entertainment, when winning at Hangman, for example, was the highlight of Friday afternoon. And playing in the schoolyard was even more fun. Can you still hear that recess bell? The moment it rang, we dashed through those heavy doors, bursting onto the playground like wild horses set free. That sacred 20 minutes when the playground became our kingdom. The fresh air hitting your face after hours of worksheets and spelling tests felt like pure liberation. The jacks tournaments where your small fingers became nimble artists, scooping up metal stars between ball bounces. Boys would cluster around tetherball poles while girls claimed the jungle gym. Some days you'd return to class with scraped knees and grass stains, badges of recess adventures that no parent would dream of filing a complaint about. But let's hear a little more about those games. Dodgeball dominance. Dodgeball. That beautiful, terrifying game where playground hierarchy was established in the sting of a rubber ball. Do you recall the heart-pounding moment when you were one of the last kids standing? The hollow thump of those red balls, the squeak of PF flyers on the gymnasium floor, and that rush of adrenaline when you caught a ball, sending your opponent to the sidelines. No participation trophies here, just the sweet triumph of dodging, ducking, and surviving another day on the school battlefield. Did you like to play dodgeball? Playing marbles at recess. Cat's eyes, steelies, boulders. Our pockets jingled with these glass treasures as we drew circles in playground dirt. Remember kneeling in the dust, perfecting that thumb flick technique that could win you someone's prized shooter? Trades were serious business, negotiations worthy of Wall Street, conducted with solemn handshakes. Boys would return home with dusty knees and fewer marbles than they brought, explaining to puzzled mothers why trading a clear swirly for 2 solid blues was the deal of the century. Red Rover and hopscotch. Red Rover, send Johnny right over. Our voices would sing out across the playground as we linked arms, forming human chains that tested both strength and friendship. Remember the chalk-drawn hopscotch grids that appeared like magic on sidewalks? Girls would toss barrettes or milk caps into squares, hopping with one foot tucked up, displaying an elegant balance that came from countless recesses of practice. These weren't just games, They were childhood institutions passed down through playground generations. What was your favorite playground game? Share it with us in the comments below. The joy of being the line leader. Nothing compared to being chosen as line leader, that coveted position at the front of the classroom line. Remember the pride swelling in your chest as you led your classmates to lunch or music class? The responsibility was enormous, setting the perfect pace, making those sharp hallway turns with military precision. For one glorious day, you weren't just another kid in saddle shoes. You were the chosen one, the standard bearer, the keeper of order in a world of childhood chaos. As you guided your peers, it was time for classic school, lunches and milk in glass bottles. Remember those tiny glass milk bottles with cardboard tops you'd punch with your straw? That first cold sip while balancing a tray of meatloaf or Thursday's spaghetti special. The lunch ladies in their hairnets served real food made from scratch. No microwaves or plastic packaging. That distinct smell of homemade rolls wafting down hallways before noon, making our stomachs growl through the last minutes of arithmetic. Remember taking turns being the milk monitor, distributing those tiny glass bottles at lunch? Those little glass bottles made milk taste special, something precious to be finished completely. Lunchtime trading. Lunchtime trading rivaled the stock market in complexity and high-stakes negotiations. I'll give you my oatmeal cookie for your apple was just the opening bid in elaborate transactions. Remember watching carefully as Mom packed your lunch, calculating its trading potential? The popular kids commanded premium trades with homemade brownies or Hostess cupcakes. Some poor soul always got stuck with egg salad nobody would touch. These lunchroom deals taught us more about economics than any textbook ever could. Let's hear about those other nostalgic things that I remember from our childhood. There are many more. The smell of freshly printed handouts. Nothing signaled a special day like the sweet, intoxicating smell of purple mimeograph ink. When Mrs. Peterson passed out those still damp worksheets, we'd all instinctively hold them to our noses for that distinctive chemical scent. Remember the slightly wet feeling of fresh copied pages and that rich purple text. Before photocopiers and printers, these spirit duplicator machines created handouts that engaged all our senses, a smell that instantly transports anyone from our generation back to spelling tests and geography quizzes. Talking about geography. The classroom globe and maps. Remember that giant pull-down map above the chalkboard? The satisfying snap as Mrs. Johnson tugged it down to show us faraway places we'd only dreamed about. That classroom globe, slightly worn at the equator from curious little fingers tracing journeys across oceans. How we'd spin it, letting fate decide which exotic country we'd land on when it stopped. Those maps with their faded colors showed us a world waiting beyond our small-town boundaries. Science and nature walks. Those magical spring days when science class moved outdoors. Remember filing out behind Mr. Peterson, clutching our composition books, ready to document every leaf, rock, and crawling creature? The thrill of spotting a chrysalis hanging from the playground fence or collecting acorns that would later fill our desk cubbies. These weren't just walks, they were expeditions into mysterious natural worlds just beyond the school parking lot. And so, different to today's ways of teaching. What was your favorite subject back then? Library time. The library's hush fell over us like a spell, broken only by the satisfying thump of the date stamp marking our borrowed treasures. Do you recall the distinctive smell of aging paper and book bindings? How the librarian somehow knew exactly which adventure story would capture your imagination. Those precious 30 minutes each week when you could lose yourself among shelves that held worlds within worlds. Spelling bees. Hearts pounding, palms sweating, spelling bees turned ordinary kids into gladiators armed only with vocabulary. Remember, standing beside your desk, the room silent except for the teacher's clear pronunciation of your word, that mixture of dread and pride when you spelled necessary correctly while the smartest kid in class had just stumbled over encyclopedia. Those moments shaped our understanding of friendly competition. Singing in music class. Miss Williams at the upright piano, her fingers dancing across ivory keys as we belted out America the Beautiful and My Country 'Tis of Thee. Remember those tattered songbooks with their mysterious notation marks? How our young voices filled the music room with surprising harmony. The joy of learning rounds and watching the music teacher's face light up when we mastered a particularly tricky chorus. Those songs still rise to our lips decades later. The joy of book fairs. Nothing transformed the gymnasium like those metal carts filled with colorful book covers and that distinctive new book smell. Remember clutching that wrinkled dollar bill from Mom, agonizing over which treasure to take home? The pride of returning to class with your new Hardy Boys mystery or Nancy Drew adventure tucked under your arm. Book fairs weren't just about reading. They were magical markets where adventures could be purchased for pocket change. Art supplies? That magnificent cardboard box in the supply closet held endless creative possibilities. Thick crayons with perfect points, construction paper in every imaginable color, and those scissors with a fascinating zigzag edge. Remember the ritual of being chosen to distribute art supplies? The responsibility of handing out exactly 2 sheets of manila paper per student? Those tempera paint sets, with their bright primary colors, would transform Friday afternoons into masterpiece sessions. Valentine's Day. Card exchanges. Those flimsy paper mailboxes we decorate with doilies and red construction paper hearts. Remember, carefully selecting which Valentine went to which classmate. The agony of deciding whether to sign your name on the special one for your crush. Those tiny candy hearts with messages that made us giggle nervously. The tension of waiting to see if the popular kids gave you one, too. These weren't just card exchanges. They were our first lesson in the delicate social dance of affection, leaving our hearts racing with each envelope opened, talking about traditional events, drawing names for Christmas gift exchanges. The hushed excitement as the teacher hat made its way around the room, filled with carefully folded paper slips bearing classmates' names. Remember the mixture of anticipation and dread. Would you draw your best friend or that quiet kid you barely knew? The strict $1 spending limit that seemed enormous then. How we'd whisper and investigate, trying to discover what your chosen one might like. Those carefully wrapped presents with shaky handwriting tags taught us the joy of giving long before we understood its true meaning. Classroom Gold Stars. Nothing compared to the heart-swelling pride of seeing that glittering gold star stuck beside your spelling test score. Remember how they caught the classroom light, broadcasting your achievement to everyone? The way teachers would make a little ceremony of it, calling you up to the front while applying that precious adhesive symbol. Some children's papers would glisten with constellations of stars, while others remained blank skies. But what happened if a teacher was unavailable? Let's hear about the thrill of a substitute teacher. The moment we walked in and spotted an unfamiliar face at the teacher's desk, pure electricity. Remember the collective whisper that would ripple through the room? Substitute. The unspoken recognition that normal rules might bend just slightly today. Testing boundaries. Entertaining this newcomer with embellished stories of how Mrs. Simmons always does it. The substitute's neat handwriting on the board somehow looked foreign in our familiar classroom. These were days of delicious uncertainty and unexpected freedom in the structure of our school routine. Passing secret notes. The delicate art of note folding, those intricate triangular packets passed palm to palm beneath desks. Remember the heart-stopping moment when your note almost got intercepted by the teacher? The encoded messages with checkboxes. Do you like me? Yes. No. Maybe. How we mastered peripheral vision to track our communications journey across the classroom. Getting caught meant public humiliation, having your private thoughts read aloud. Yet the risk only made these paper confidences more thrilling. Did you write or receive a lot of notes back then? I certainly did. But sometimes we were very naughty. And then we would be sent to the principal office. Think back to that sinking feeling when the teacher said those dreaded words. Go to the principal's office. The slow walk down that endless hallway might as well have been the Green Mile. The wooden bench outside the principal's door, where you'd sit, stomach churning, listening to the tick, tick, tick of the secretary's typewriter. That office had a smell all its own, furniture polish, old books, and the faint hint of pipe tobacco. Remember how the sunlight would filter through those Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the polished desk where your fate would be decided? Waiting there, you'd practice your explanation, rehearse your most sincere apology, and promise yourself you'd never pass another note or shoot another spitball. Be honest, have you been sent to the principal's office? Lining up for the polio vaccine. The gymnasium transformed into an impromptu medical clinic, folding tables with white cloths and nurses in crisp uniforms. Do you recall that peculiar mix of fear and pride? How we'd try to look brave in front of classmates while our stomachs knotted with anxiety? Parents had signed permission slips, grateful for protection. We were too young to understand. The sharp sting of the needle, the tiny bandage worn like a badge of courage. Those lines of children represented something we couldn't grasp then. A generation being saved through tiny drops of medicine, watching the clock before the final bell. Those last 10 minutes of the school day stretched into eternity. Remember staring at that round clock above the blackboard, the second hand seeming to move through molasses, the quiet rustle of papers being gathered, books closed, the collective willing of time to move faster. How we'd tap our feet silently against desk legs, already mentally racing down hallways to freedom. When that final bell finally rang, sharp and glorious, it released us like arrows from a bow into the bright afternoon possibilities. Before we talk about hanging out after school, let's hear what it was like at the end of each school year. Year-end school, plays and pageants. Crepe paper costumes, wobbly cardboard scenery, and stage fright so intense it made your knees knock. Remember the weeks of rehearsals, memorizing lines written by ambitious teachers, parents crowded into uncomfortable folding chairs, armed with flashbulb cameras and beaming smiles. How even the smallest roles felt momentous. Your 3 lines as the third pilgrim practiced endlessly in front of bathroom mirrors. The magic of transformation as shy classmates became confident performers. And the excitement for a long summer break amongst us kids was perceptible. Soda, fountain hangouts, after school. That magical moment when the bell rang and you'd dash to Richardson's drugstore with your best friends, pennies jingling in your pocket. Remember, sliding onto those swiveling counter stools, feet dangling, ordering cherry cokes from the owner who knew everyone by name. The soda jerk would mix phosphates in those tall metal cups while Elvis crooned from the jukebox. Homework could wait while you shared secrets, pooled nickels for another round of root beer floats, and watched high school couples sharing straws in corner booths. These weren't just after-school stops. They were our first taste of independence. Talking about handing out after-school and core childhood memories, check out this video on how childhood was in the 1950s. Or, if you prefer to dwell in the nostalgia of the 60s, choose this one. From endless summer days to iconic toys, bike racing, and refreshing garden hose, I covered all of our cherished memories. I am certain you will love them since you watched to the end of this video.